Moderator Margaret Brennan is joining us now from Washington. She's at the City Lab DC event where she just had a one-on-one with Michael Bloomberg. Should be pretty interesting. So we want to talk about that, Margaret. But first, we want to talk about the killing of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. How much does his death change the operations in the Middle East for the U.S., if it changes at all?
Well, according to the interview I had with the vice president yesterday, it doesn't impact, or he couldn't explain how it would impact the mission set. He would not be specific in terms of the number of troops that will still remain. The president has changed a few times his plans for pulling back the U.S. military presence in Syria. But his argument was that there will be a counterterrorism presence to be determined of some size and scope in a friendly country, presumably Iraq. Baghdadi's death is absolutely a significant win for the military and intelligence professionals who carried this out, and certainly for the alliances that they built with the Kurds, who have been providing intelligence, as have the Iraqi government. But operationally, it is not clear that taking out or decapitating the organization will affect the rest of the body, since it was so diffuse in terms of operations. The vice president said on Face the Nation yesterday that as recently as 2 weeks ago, U.S. believes Baghdadi was actually playing a role in attacks. That was new to me, because what has been ISIS's model is to inspire rather than to have direct command and control over the terror attacks that have occurred. And so without Baghdadi there, it is left to be determined what it will do to the insurgency. It's really the conditions that continue to exist in Syria, which is just as volatile, just as deadly as it ever has been in terms of the war that continues to wage there, and the vacuum that is left power-wise that allows for terrorist groups to continue to have a hold on places like Idlib province, which is where this raid was carried out, taking out Baghdadi.
Margaret, as you know, some top Democrats were not briefed on the operation. Not all members of the Gang of Eight, the leadership on Capitol Hill, were briefed, but some Republican senators like Richard Burr and Lindsey Graham, and even Russia was informed. Obviously, we needed Russia's agreement to fly over their airspace, but the significance of the president of the United States thanking Russia in his remarks, how significant was that?
Well, you know, it was unusual to have the president repeatedly reference Russia and the role it played, because as far as we can tell, all it meant was deconfliction, meaning they got out of our way. They got out of the U.S. way and didn't allow for, any kind of challenge from the air to the U.S. presence. Same thing with Turkish authorities. Up to this point, all we've heard is they got out of the way and let the U.S. use some airspace. But with Turkey, there are going to be some further questions because of the proximity of where Baghdadi was found to transit points across the Turkish border. Very interesting. Turkey has been criticized repeatedly for being too permissive to terror groups, specifically ISIS, moving through their territory. So I think, if anything, there are going to be more questions about how much Turkey knew and when. Russia, we don't know that they played any operational role whatsoever in the raid, so it was unusual that the president repeatedly brought up his thanks and remarked on how much they had suffered from ISIS. It's not clear what he meant there.
Okay, Margaret, let's talk about the event that you're at right now, City Lab 2019. You had a one-on-one with former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg. You talked to him about the impeachment inquiry and his take on it. What do you have to say?
Well, the former mayor is very active in Democratic politics right now in terms of funding and supporting issues and platforms that certainly had an influence in 2018 in helping to flip the House Democratic. He personally says that he believes that made a difference in terms of some of the funding. And so it's interesting to have him continue to weigh in on these national questions. And he said for the first time that he does believe now that impeachment is worth pursuing, that it's not just a vanity project, that it is not just something that it is being done for no political end, since it, as he acknowledged, is unlikely to actually mean the removal of the president, because the Republican-controlled Senate is unlikely to go through a trial and then convict the president. But he did think it was an exercise worth doing. So it was interesting to have him, as an outsider looking in at Washington, say that he thinks this is worth doing. There are so many mayors from around the country here at this event, and they are not necessarily following the ins and outs of what's happening in this capital the way so many Beltway insiders are.
As you know, Margaret, earlier this year, he announced he's not running for president in 2020. There were some people who were hoping that he might. What's he saying to you about some of the Democrats who are running?
Well, you know, what's interesting is Michael Bloomberg, and I've interviewed him a number of times, is usually very direct. I could not get a direct yes or no answer out of him on whether he's reconsidering that decision not to run. It sounded to many people in the room like he left the door open to a maybe as a late add to the race, but he would not be pinned down to that no matter how hard I tried. He had declared back in March that he wasn't going to run. But there have been constant reports because of this crowded race, having front runners who have had some health problems. Bernie Sanders certainly comes to mind there. Joe Biden, there have been questions about the viability of his candidacy given fundraising issues and other questions about him. And Michael Bloomberg has been public in his criticism of Elizabeth Warren, the front runner's policies on a number of things, including her wealth tax. So he's not ready to put money behind or endorse those lead candidates. In fact, it sounds like he has some concerns there, particularly when it came to Kamala Harris. He said her policy platforms on executive action to change gun laws, that's just not going to happen. He was very dismissive of that. Gun control policy is something he is actively pushing for at the local level around the country. Mayor Pete and Cory Booker, two people who had been through this program for mayors funded by Bloomberg, he said he likes that they both had executive experience, but no endorsement yet. Perhaps because he is leaving that door cracked open a little bit as he looks at the Democratic field.
All right. Margaret, thank you.